Welcome viewers. Today I have come up with another very interesting research methodology topic, that is deceptive communication. Broadly speaking, or speaking more specifically, non-lying deceptive verbal communication, which is a kind of a taboo in modern day humanities research, particularly qualitative humanities research. It's a kind of a taboo. There are so many things in modern qualitative humanities research that a researcher needs to avoid in his or her research, and he must be extremely careful that such things do not take place in their research works. They need to be extremely careful because there are so many flaws that frequently appear in particularly descriptive type of research works, which the evaluators do not like at all. One such interesting thing that is needed to be eliminated from the research is deceptive communication. There are so many in number. Number cannot be counted at all, but I'll stress upon only a few, but speak about only one. For example, methodical adhocism, which is opposed to a sort of methodical specificism. Secondly, subjective circular reasoning. And thirdly, the topic of our discussion today, deceptive communication. Now, what do we mean by communication? What do we mean by deception? And how should we define deceptive communication? That is the point. Communication is basically a transmission or exchange of ideas and thoughts where there are some senders and receivers of the message. And communication can be classified into two broad categories: formal communication and informal communication. And again, these two categories of communication can be subcategorized into two divisions: verbal communication and non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication refers to bodily postures such as gestures, facial expressions, such and such. And verbal communication is represented by both spoken words and written words. So these are the two types of communication processes. By deception, we understand a kind of trick in the remarks, in the statements. There are two types of deceptions, broadly speaking: lying deception and non-lying deception. Lying is definitely a thing that's to be condemned, so that is an offense. So lying cannot be accepted in research. So there is nothing to explain the lying deceptions. But the interesting fact is that non-lying deceptions are also there, that are basically or essentially acceptable in research, but desirably should be avoided. I will explain. I will revert back to that. So deceptive communication is a kind of a tricky statements deliberately made to accomplish a particular object. That object must be accomplished by the speaker himself. So that is called deceptive communication, when a specific purpose of the speaker is served. There are two important features of deceptive communication. There are so many features, but I will stress upon only two. Intentional. It must be intentional. The deception must be intentional. It is not a kind of a thing that appears as by chance. It's not like that. It is a definite intentional deception, and it should comprise of a flawed metaphor or sort of patchwork or bajukti or equivocation, which is also a kind of deliberate ambiguity. So deliberate ambiguity is called equivocation, which is a taboo in research. So deceptive communication covers a wide range of tabooed subjects. I will give you two examples, one from economics and the other from Sanskrit literature. Firstly, suppose an economist says that quote unquote economy has hit a speed bump. What he actually states that the economy is encountering slowdown. It is going through a trade depression or business cycle. So it is getting hampered. So economy is hampered. But what he states, what he actually tries to mean by that flawed metaphor, speed bump, is that he wants the listener or the reader to understand a quite different thing from what he actually states. He states that the economy is facing slowdown, right? But what he tries to mean is since a vehicle, when a vehicle hits a speed bump, it is almost a natural slowdown, and the economy will and the vehicle will naturally within a very short period of time recover from that slowdown and accelerate on crossing over the speed bump. So much in the same way, the economy will also accelerate only after a natural and temporal slowdown. So what the economist wants the viewers to understand, that the economy is not hopelessly poised or stranded in a hopeless situation where there is no hope of recovery at all, but knowing fully well that this is going to happen, that economy will never recover, he is actually guiding people to believe or hiding the truth from believing that the economy is really suffering sort of a disaster. So this is a deceptive communication indeed. And I'll come back to the second instance, which is I have already stated from my Sanskrit literature. The Naiyaikos or the Naya philosophers believe or accept the fact that the Vedas are of human origin, that is Paurusheo. The Naya philosophers believe that the Vedas are a Paurusheo or of human origin. But they actually deny it when they say that the Purusha is actually the Almighty or God, who is also called Param Purusha. So since the Vedas are derived or born out of the Parama Purusha or the Almighty, it should be called of human origin, Paurusheo. So it is clearly a deception that what they believe is exactly what they said, but they have resorted to sort of a typical guarded logic, which is not a fallacy but only a guarded logic, and as a result of which they are actually not being able to shift the paradigm. So they are actually balancing the two sides. One side upholding the Paurusheo theory and the other side upholding the Apaurusheo theory. So the Naiyayico philosophers have actually taken a marriage of convenience, should I say, a sort of typical stance rather, that the Vedas are Paurusheo in nature. In that sense, they are actually denying the definition of Purusha, that is Panchabhuta Samannito, which is a living organism. But when they say it is not that Panchabhuta Samannito Purush, but the Almighty or the God himself, so it is a clear deception on the part of the Naiyayica philosophers. But it is acceptable. It is acceptable in research. But when we understand that this is the kind of a deceptive communication, we must accept as a modern researcher that that was a kind of deceptive communication. So in our case, we should not adopt such principle of deceptive communication, but we can indeed study the various methods and the various processes and the various documents that speak for deceptive communication. But one thing is to be borne in mind here, that the figures of speech, for example Vajastuti, which is again divided into two categories, Stuti Ninda or Ninda Stuti, that is disguised blame or ironical praise, this will not fall under the category of deception. This is a figure of speech, figuratively used So in that sense, Byajastuti is not a deception, because the purpose is clearly stated and the author or the speaker of the statement is not meaning anything other than what he actually speaks. So in that sense, it is not a deception. One more aspect of the deceptive communication is also to be taken care of, take note of. That is, from the evaluator's perspective, deceptive communication is a taboo, no doubt about that. But from the researcher's viewpoint, it is indeed a matter of research. It is indeed a matter of research, because I have already stated that there are so many instances in ancient, medieval and modern literature covering all literatures of all languages that there are plenty of examples when the deception communications have been undertaken by the authors, by the original authors. So that must be studied. That must be studied. So in that sense, if as a researcher adopt deceptive communication as a matter of subject, matter of your research, it is absolutely fine. No point denying it, no point objecting to that. But you must consider as a researcher that when you are presenting something in your own dissertation or present hypothesis, then deceptive communication must be avoided, and it must be eliminated from your research. So that is the deceptive communication, and I hope it is after all sufficient for giving a brief introduction to this wonderful process of communication. Thank you.